Hello, and welcome to the 2022-2023 Special Education Technical Assistance webinar. I'm Holly Neal with the Special Education Planning and Policy Development Office. I'd like to start off today by thanking the panelists. Like last year, multiple DESE offices are working together to bring you the information you need to understand LEA determinations and, if necessary, a clear, well-resourced and supported path for improvement. Some of the folks who have been working on this will be presenting today. Their names and offices are listed here. Today's objectives are that you will leave this webinar with the ability to understand the calculations used to make the special education determinations, identify appropriate DESE offices to answer questions, understand fiscal implications of the determinations, recognize LEA leadership roles and responsibilities, integrate data into school and district improvement planning, and become familiar with various frameworks and evidence-based practices for improvement. We hope by the end of this webinar that this work will feel less like a gotcha and more like DESE as a partner and a supporter, providing universal information and meeting you where you are for further assistance so that you and your LEA are supported to meet your strategic goals. This webinar is designed for superintendents, special education administrators, and business officers from LEAs with any determination level. But it may also be helpful to share the link to this webinar with others if improvement planning is required. We know that some of you are new to your positions. We hope that this provides a good introduction with connections to the larger context. For folks who are veterans, almost nothing in this presentation will be new. For you, much of this will be a review. However, I'm betting that you will hear about some helpful resources that are new to you as well. Before going any further, I'd also like to highlight that the department is also in a continuous improvement cycle. Please provide us feedback after the webinar. Help us to help you by telling us what you want, what you don't want, what is helpful and what isn't. The survey is designed to only take 2 minutes. All right, our agenda. First, we'll review the big picture. Then Erica Gonzalez will talk to you about the calculations. Caitlin Hogan will talk to you about maintenance of effort. Amy Pollan will talk to you about tiered focus monitoring. Jamie Camacho will talk to you about PRS and complaints. And I will join you again for the Closing Gaps 2, along with Jamie and Abby Slayton. Also, if you have not already watched Closing Gaps 1, we recommend that you go watch that first. Okay, for some high-level context. When you hear general supervision, you may think educator evaluation. That's not what we're talking about here. IDEA defines systems for special education, which are called general supervision. It's the grounding framework for the department's special education work, and it includes 8 components: fiscal management, integrated monitoring activities, improvement, correction, incentives and sanctions, policies, procedures, and effective implementation, targeted technical assistance and professional development, effective dispute resolution, data on processes and results, and the state performance plan and annual performance report. Determinations are part of the department's general supervision functions. And of course, all of these puzzle pieces interact and influence each other as part of the special education accountability and assistance system. IDEA defines the primary focus of general supervision, which is to improve students with disabilities' educational results and functional outcomes, which aligns to the department's mission, which is, as you know, to prepare students to succeed in post-secondary education, compete in the global economy, and understand civic rights and responsibilities, and in so doing, to close all proficiency gaps. Under IDEA, the department must make annual determinations about district-specific needs for technical assistance or intervention in special education. Massachusetts does so based on the same 4 categories that OSEP, which is the Office of Special Education Programs, uses to make state determinations. These are meets requirements, needs assistance, needs intervention, and needs substantial intervention. For LEAs outside of meets requirements, IDEA requires 2 things. 1, for the LEA to have a corrective action plan or improvement plan, and 2, for the department to provide assistance, monitor and publicly report, and impose conditions on IDEA funding. In Massachusetts, the special education determinations and assistance are also aligned to the general accountability system for all students. Again, this year, strong assistance and collaboration work is going on within DESE to support you. The Special Education Planning and Policy Office, the Office of Public School Monitoring, the State System of Support, the Office of Effective Practices, and the Office of Charter Schools and School Redesign are all collaborating. Now I'd like to pass it over to Erica.
So staff on my team were able to collect a lot of these data and then put them together through the system that I'm going to explain very briefly here to you now. Next slide, please. So the special education determinations are a collection of 7 different measures. These measures are similar to those that you saw in the results that you received last year. But for those of you who perhaps were unable to participate last year or are new to this system, just wanted to take a little time to talk about what goes into these determinations and sort of where we get that information. So as Holly mentioned, this set of determinations is aligned to DESE's accountability for all students in a couple of different ways. And that starts specifically with some of the measures that we're using. So this accountability for all students piece refers specifically to the annual dropout rate and the 5-year cohort graduation rate data that we include in our special education determinations. These are the same reported measures as you see on our public website, as you see with incorporated into our annual accountability determinations. The difference being here for special education determinations, we are using your district's students with disabilities rates, specifically their annual dropout rates and 5-year cohort graduation rates from the most recent year of data that we had available when we produced the determination. So at the time, that was the 2021 annual dropout rate and the 2020 5-year cohort graduation rate data. It's important to note that these are lagged indicators, right? We release graduation rate and dropout rate data a little bit later following the closure of each school year so that districts and schools have the opportunity to review that data before we release it. So that typically comes out in the winter every year and then is incorporated into the following year's determinations. We also include special education compliance information that comes specifically from our public school monitoring office, their compliance information. That's from the 21-22 school year. And the PRS or problem resolution system findings also from the 2022 school year. These are findings that we calculate per 1,000 students with disabilities in a district. It's a way to sort of standardize the measure because, you know, as just a loose example, 5 findings in a district with, you know, 100 students with disabilities is very different than 5 findings in a district with perhaps 2,000 students with disabilities, right? So we wanted to standardize that measure a little bit to accommodate size of district. We also incorporate SPP APR data, specifically compliance indicators and performance indicators that we have listed here. And we use those findings as different indicators within the special education determinations. And then we also include significant disproportionality data from the 2 most recent school years. So that would be the 22 and 23 school years in the annual determinations. Next slide, please. So this slide actually, the next 2 slides constitute the rubric that we use to assign points for your district's data for each of these indicators here. And so actually, if you wouldn't mind just jumping to the next slide, you'll see that the points span from 1 to 4, 4 being, if you will, full credit, and 1 being sort of the bottom end of the range. And we assign points, as I mentioned, for each indicator that your district has enough data for. And we assign 1 to 4 points for each of those, and then do a calculation, which I'll show you in a minute, to come up with an overall percentage that represents your district's special education determination percentage. It's important to note here that not every district has data for every single one of these indicators. For example, we have districts in our state that are considered districts, but they only serve grades K through 8. As a result, they don't have graduation rate data. They also don't have dropout rate data. In districts such as those, we don't penalize you for not having data for an indicator. Those measures are simply left out of the calculation, and your calculation is based on you know, just the total number of indicators for which you do have data. The same would apply, for example, to the public school monitoring indicator. Not every district is reviewed every year by our colleagues in the PSM office. And so therefore, if you haven't been reviewed in the most recent year, that particular indicator is left out of your district's overall calculation. So it's flexible and accommodates districts where data are not available for very valid reasons. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, please. So we create a pretty large spreadsheet with every district and all of the different columns that you saw in that rubric. And we assign points on that 1 to 4 scale based on how your district performed on each of those indicators, based on the criteria that you can see in the rubric. And we issued the rubric so that you could go ahead and actually create your own district's calculation if you wanted to do so. So you can verify our math, but also just, you know, be able perhaps to see where there is some room for you to make improvement in future years if there is some low-hanging fruit, if you will. So the way we do the calculation, it's a simple percentage. We add up all of the points that you earned across the indicators or categories that you have data for, and divide that by the total number of possible points that you could have earned across those categories. And that is calculated into a percentage that represents your district's special education determination percentage. And then, as you can see in the table at the bottom of this slide, we've essentially broken the percentages 0 to 100 into 3 different categories on the special education determination scale, where those with the highest percentages are getting meets requirements. Those with the lowest percentages are assigned a needs intervention status. And then, as you'll notice on the far right, there is that needs substantial intervention status, which is not directly assigned based on your district special education determination percentage, but is more of a decision made by DESE that takes into consideration compliance to IDEA on the part of the district, and that's sort of not an automatic calculation, if you will. So that is the way that we create these determinations, these percentages, and again, very easily replicated by you in your district if you are somebody who likes to work with spreadsheets, track your own progress, double check our math, which we always appreciate. But I did want to point you to a number of resources that are available related to these various indicators, some of which are the profiles reports that include the statewide data and your district level data. Others are related to the reports that come out of PSM or our PRS offices, and then the SPP APR data as well. And I do just want to plug the FAQ that folks in the Special Education Planning and Policy Office put together to sort of support these determinations. That's not listed here, I don't think, as a resource, but it does point to a lot of this information. It also goes into a little bit more detail on how certain measures, for example, dropout rate, are calculated, so that you can have a better understanding of how DESE comes up with the data that goes, into these calculations, and is sort of a foundation for these determinations. Next slide. So just as a little bit of a follow-up, again, as you can sort of see represented on the panel here, different DESE offices contribute data to these overall calculations. And so while a really good place to start is with the folks that you're familiar with in the special education office, if you do have very data specific questions, depending on which indicator you're interested in, there's contact information here for you to reach out to the various DESE offices who helped supply that information.
Thank you, Erica, and thanks for the reminder about the FAQ. There's just a couple questions I'm going to follow up with quickly. Just as a reminder, how for those that are on the call, for students that are out of district or students that are homeschooled, how would that factor into these calculations?
So those are two different questions, I think, with two different answers. I am joined by my colleague, Craig Weller here. So Craig, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go ahead and take a stab at these first. Students in out-of-district placements who are funded by public dollars are the responsibility of the sending district. So those districts would be included in those students would be included in your district's dropout or graduation rate data. Homeschool students, it's my understanding, are technically not enrolled in a public school district and therefore are not included in these rates.
Thank you, Erica. One other question that came up is questions about the percentages. And Holly, I remember last year in some of our meetings that we had with districts that we had identified on the rubric their percentages. How would districts get that information if they're looking to know it, particularly where they are with the percentages?
With the percentage of the full calculation. So the letters that each district received includes a breakdown of the actual district data for each of the categories in the rubric. And it also provides the full percentage of the entire calculation. So go ahead and look back at the letter you received or give our office a call.
Thank you, Holly and Erica. And Caitlin, we're going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Caitlin Hogan. I'm a fiscal specialist in the Special Ed Planning and Policy Office, and I oversee fiscal compliance of IDEA. Next slide. So for the maintenance of effort, it requires that any LEA receiving IDEA Part B funds, so either the 240 or 262, they must budget and spend at least the same amount that they spent on special education, and it's on a year-to-year basis, and it's required for all LEAs. There are 4 ways the law allows 4 ways to meet MOE, and it's using state and local funds, and state and local per capita, local funds only, and local funds per capita. Next slide. So in Mass, due to the Chapter 70 funding, we can only allow for 2 methods to meet MOE, and that's state and local expenditures and state and local per capita. So because Chapter 70 goes into the general fund, it loses the identity. So you can't break it out. And so the only true state funds are circuit breaker. If you have any questions or need more detail about this, you can always contact school finance or Jay Sullivan, since they're more involved with the Chapter 70. So there are 2 parts to MOE. One is the eligibility piece, and that is your MOE level for budgeting, and we collect that information on the grant application every year. And then the second piece is the compliance standard, and that we look at your end of year report and we look at your actual expenditures. So you have to meet both ways every year. So if you may hear from me in January saying you didn't meet MOE compliance, and here again in October that you didn't meet the eligibility. So they're two separate things. Next slide. So for the MOE eligibility, LEAs must budget for this education of children with disabilities, at least what they had spent in the comparison year. So what we're looking at is when on the application, we're looking at the last time that you met MOE compliance, so your expenditures, and then you have to report your budget. So your budget has to at least be what you spent the last time you met MOE. And again, you can only use state and local funds for this. The local only is usually grayed out. So MOE eligibility is determined every year. It's calculated on the application, and I'm sure you've either seen it or at least are aware of it. And your application cannot be approved until you meet the MOE eligibility standard. Next slide. So compliance, the compliance standard, it prohibits LEAs from reducing the level of expenditures for student with disabilities. So in other words, you have to at least spend what you spent the last time you met MOE, and it's not necessarily year to year. It could be, you could meet, and you have to meet, you can meet MOE by using one of the 2 methods. You don't have to use both. So if you're going to use your per pupil, the last time you met may not have been, last year, it could have been 3 years ago. So that's what you're comparing it to, the last time that you met either the per pupil or the expenditure. So, like for example, when we're looking at your end of year report, that compares your MOE expenditures on a year-to-year basis. So it may show that you didn't meet MOE, but you could have in fact met it, or vice versa. So there are exceptions to MOE for both the eligibility and compliance. So if you're not meeting MOE, you can submit documentation after we contact you. And the allowable exceptions, they're voluntary departure of special ed staff. So if a teacher retires or resigns, took a leave of absence, their salaries and benefits can be counted towards the shortfall. A decrease in enrollment is another exception. When we're reviewing your compliance and your eligibility, we actually look at your enrollment numbers, so we kind of can rule that out as one of the exceptions. So if we determine that you do meet MOE using that, we won't even bother contacting you. Another exception is the termination of costly programs. So if a student's in a high cost program and they're no longer in it, the cost for that can go towards it. And the termination of long-term purchases or expenditures. So exceptions are allowed for any district. It's then if you go to the next slide. So adjustments to MOA, adjustments are only allowed for districts that have a meets requirements, which is why determination levels are so important for fiscal. And an LEA may use 50% of their increase allocation to account for the difference. So consequences for not meeting the eligibility standard. During your application process, we review your MOE. If we determine that you haven't met MOE, we will contact you. We give you the opportunity to either review what you've reported on the application, or you can submit exceptions and documentation, and we'll review it and let you know if they're allowable. If they're not allowable and you don't meet the eligibility standard, you're not eligible to receive the IDE grants. This has never happened, and we do work with you to try and get you into compliance. And the compliance standard. So we look at your end of year report and we pull your expenditures and we review your enrollment and your expenditures and determine whether or not MOE has been met for compliance. Again, we contact you, give you the opportunity to look at the end of year report, make sure the numbers are accurate. And then we asked for you to submit an exception spreadsheet and provide any documentation to account for any of these exceptions. If MOE is still not met after you submit your exceptions, you will be required to pay back the shortfall. So it's either your state and local, how much the difference in your state and local expenditures, your per pupil, or the 240 grant, whichever is the lowest amount. So here are a number of resources. The quick reference guide that gives a general overall of everything. And the calculator is what we use to determine MOE. And if you don't meet MOE, I usually send you the calculator with the exception spreadsheet and all of this information. But if you have any questions or you're concerned about your maintenance of effort, you can always contact me.
Thanks, Caitlin. I don't see any questions right now for you, so we're going to turn it over to Amy Pollan.
Thank you, Jamie. My name is Amy Pollan, and I am the Assistant Director in the Office of Public School Monitoring. And the process that we use to monitor a select choice of civil rights and special education laws and regulations is called tiered focus monitoring. So I'm sure a lot of you are really familiar with our process. Everybody is engaged, all LEAs are engaged in this process every 3 years with self-assessment and progress reporting often happening in the off years as well. So like Erica was saying, our point values for tiered focus monitoring are based on the previous year's TFM review. So I apologize, I updated this slide. It looked like it didn't take, so my apologies. It was the 21-22 school year is what we are using the point values for in this round of special education determinations. So I think what's really important is because if you've been part of the TFM process, tiered focus monitoring review process, you know that it is civil rights and special education. These points are based solely on special education findings. And for a lot of you, if you did have findings during the 21-22 school year, you are well into the progress reporting stage. You might have already closed out those progress reports. So we can go on to the next slide there. So resources for us for the tiered focus monitoring review are really specific to whatever the particular findings are. So it's not sort of a blanket resource if you have any findings at all. It's really connected to the particular area, whether it was a procedure, whether it's timelines and records. We really try to tailor our resources to the specific needs of the LEA. We do have a PSM web page and the TFM toolkit that gives a really nice overview of what the tiered focus monitoring process is. And within that has all of the criteria that we look at. when you are involved in tiered focused monitoring, you are assigned a chairperson from the Office of Public School Monitoring. And that chairperson is really available to help sort of navigate the TFM process. And they're also really great resources for navigating the department. You know, if you have questions or need to be in contact with people and you're not sure where to start, the chair people are just really great supports. If there is a finding, I had mentioned progress updates and progress reports, and those happen through what we call our continuous improvement monitoring plans, which is a SIP, and corrective action plans. And those are just plans that are designed to bring a school into compliance when non-compliance is identified. Oftentimes, we work with districts to make really meaningful systemic changes. So it's not just resolving something for compliance sake, but really looking at more promising practices to see how we can make more authentic change that really does impact student outcomes. And then through those, updates are provided to the department until it can be confirmed that yes, any non-compliance has been resolved. So that's sort of how this sort of all fits into the special education determinations. And any questions about this at all, please feel free to contact me. I know that a lot of you are heavily involved in this, so I don't want to spend too much time going over something that's quite familiar with people. And if there's any questions, happy to answer them. And if not, we'll send it on over, I believe, to April for PRS complaints.
Amy, no questions for you. I did see a question in here related to PRS, and there is not anybody on the call today from PRS, so I'd recommend reaching out directly to PRS. And I think that contact information was on the slide that Erica presented with the data points and the contact information. And I think I'm doing PRS, Holly, is that right? Okay. So I'm going to go through this information fairly quickly. A lot of this information is just informational for you, but I'm not going to go into a lot of depth. So we'll just start with the first slide. This slide just really kind of talks about what is the responsibilities of the department when it comes to complaint resolution. And the piece that I just want to kind of draw to your attention is the department is required to investigate complaints. As you can tell from the slide, the department is required to not only investigate procedural issues, but also any matter that pertains to the implementation of IDEA. And I know that question has come up quite a bit lately, so I just wanted to make sure that I mention that. I'm going to move quickly through these slides, Holly, so you can move right to the next one. This is some just information of what is PRS, what do they do, and some information about their complaint management system. And I'm not going to go into detail on that one as well. Again, some information about the minimum state complaint procedures. If you have more specific questions on this, I do recommend that you reach out directly to PRS. And again, that information was included. So we'll skip right to the next one. This slide gives you a little bit of information about what type of complaints PRS may address. Again, it could be anything related to the implementation of IDEA, which is a very broad category. But generally, this is what we tend to see as far as the type of complaints and the categories that we receive complaints in. And here's the contact information right here. I recommend if you have any specific questions, there was one in the Q&A that was looking for some historical information or some information on current complaints, you certainly can reach out to them and they can better answer those questions for you. And I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Holly at this point.
Thank you, Jamie. So we're going to start with a quick review of the basics and what we discussed in last year's webinar, but most of the time today will be spent on talking about drafting, implementing, and monitoring an improvement plan. And again, none of this will be new to you, just hopefully organized in a way that's easy for you to use. As always, we start with what the research says, which is the achievement of students with disabilities and their peers without disabilities are tightly linked, starting in early childhood. all students benefit from evidence-based core instructional practices. And the bottom line is equitable access to high quality, rigorous instruction with high expectations for students with disabilities is critical. Next slide. So let's take 10 seconds to jot down 3 strengths of your LEA in general education and special education, or maybe even strengths based on the work that you do together. It's important as part of this conversation that we ground ourselves in strengths, both general education and special education. Then regularly reflect on how we can use those to move forward with improvement for students with disabilities. The 3 strengths you listed, along with others, can and should be a resource to help you in your work to close gaps. We want to emphasize that the department's expectation is that a team needs to be leading this work, not just the special education director. We know that a lone special education director or a team of special educators can't ensure that tiered supports prior to special education are strong, effective, and meeting the needs of all learners. Strategic teaming is important, both at the administrator and work group levels. If possible, try and fold this work into an existing improvement work and the existing teams that accompany that work. Last year's webinar provides resources that can help, and I've included that link later in the PowerPoint. I also want to pause for a minute and address the elephant in the room. We know that staffing is a big issue right now, and we know that the evidence-based processes we'll be talking about today were developed pre-COVID. If you're feeling isolated, or if you're in a district that needs to include more general education leaders and educators in order to get traction for this work, consider again who can help make inroads. Also consider creative and strategic approaches for participation and partnership. How can you increase your footprint, both short-term and long-term? From spending one-time funds or unencumbered funds that have to be spent before next year, to hire a consultant to help design structures and tools and resources for you to use during this process, to examine existing contracts with consultants and vendors you're already working with, who might already be posed to support this work. Also, parent groups, like what role might your parent-teacher association and CPAC take? Consider also the community and private partners or resources and nonprofits you've intended to engage but haven't yet, or those you haven't considered before but whose goals align with your LEA's success gap. For example, is there a way to engage with your local Chamber of Commerce in partnership? Next slide. This slide. In this context, a gap means an outcome difference between groups of students. Gaps can indicate that the educational programming that your LEA offers isn't meeting the needs of all groups of children. And when allowed to continue, these gaps often result in poor outcomes for children in those groups. Gaps can exist between different racial, ethnic groups, or relate to factors such as disability category, English learner status, low income, high mobility, such as students experiencing homelessness and students in foster care, and other factors. Addressing gaps requires a close look at the issues of equity, inclusion, and opportunity. For example, is there a lack of access to high quality instructional materials or curriculum? Next slide. Improving outcome gaps is not about an individual child or group of children's failure to perform. It's about structural components that impact a group of children's performance. The work focuses on systems level thinking and structures by examining differences in schools within the district, opportunities students have experienced, student-specific groups, and outcome areas that have gaps. So for example, the graduation and dropout rates of multilingual students with disabilities compared to the rates of all other students, or the out-of-school suspension rate of Black students with disabilities compared to the suspension rate of all other children. And are there marked differences between schools? Or the placement rates of students with disabilities in your district compared to similar districts or the state rate, and opportunity gaps, like enrollment of students with disabilities in advanced coursework or gifted and talented programming compared to students without disabilities. Next slide. LEAs should prioritize the areas identified as needing the most improvement through the determination rubric. As mentioned earlier, in order to meet IDEA requirements, LEAs with needs improvement or needs assistance must have either a corrective action plan, which is like your work with in the tiered focus monitoring process, or an improvement plan, which for some is like the work that they do with SSOS at the department. What this means is that for districts determined to need intervention, the department will generally prioritize two categories, with LEA data on the bottom two rows of the rubric, and will provide individualized support to that district on those areas. And for districts determined to need assistance, generally the district will select 1 to 2 categories with LEA data on the bottom two rows of the rubric. Next slide. However, in some cases, the department may identify, or schools can choose, 3 categories as a priority because they strategically intersect. For example, Happydale Public School District was determined to need intervention. The LEA's data is in row 2 for dropout, row 1 for graduation, and row 3 for indicators 5 and 6, which are the full inclusion rates. The department may direct Happydale to prioritize students with disabilities, dropout, graduation, and LRE because of the positive connection between inclusive opportunities and graduation. Next slide. There are 3 goals for engaging in closing gaps. Using data and evidence to discover the root cause of the identified success gaps, to learn about contributing factors, and to apply what you learn to prevent future issues. While outcome gaps can be similar in multiple LEAs, each LEA's root causes and contributing factors may look very different from one another. For this reason, there's no one evidence-based practice that will magically improve a success gap for all LEAs. The lessons learned as you go through this process can and should drive your LEA's improvement work and selection of any evidence-based high leverage practices that you choose to implement. Next slide. We recommend using one of these 2 research-based planning frameworks. Planning for Success is the Massachusetts recommended planning process for education. And we also included the Success Gap Toolkit because it's generally aligned with Planning for Success and it's designed for IDEA related improvement. Also, it includes some immediate use tools that can be used within any research-based planning framework. These 2 frameworks are flexible and can be modified to fit your LEA's needs. And this is important because we are looking for you to leverage your current improvement work and strengths and to add aspects of special education outcomes to that work. We don't want you to recreate the wheel. We're looking for you to strengthen the wheel. For example, how can this work link to your current SOA and ESSA work? And if you're already engaged in a sustainable improvement plan and iterative process, how can outcomes for students with disabilities be incorporated? Next slide. The essential elements of a planning framework are database decision-making, stemming from disaggregated data, root cause analysis, and stakeholder feedback, cultural responsiveness, implementation of a strong evidence-based core instructional program, ongoing assessment, for instance, universal screening and progress monitoring, evidence-based instructional and positive behavioral interventions and supports, school and district leadership that facilitates improvement, and parent and family engagement through the educational process and system. No matter what planning framework you choose, all 7 of these elements should be evident somewhere. Also, be sure to select a planning framework that includes tools and resources to support your district's planning. So for instance, does the framework you're considering emphasize a review of students with disabilities access to high quality curriculum and instructional materials? Next slide. Okay, we have a poll for you. Great, thank you. Do you already use a planning framework? If so, which one? So answers are still coming in. So okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds and then we'll end the poll. Can you share the results, April? Oh, you are sharing the results. So it looks like 16% are using planning for success and 20% are using other. I'm wondering if participants would be willing to share the other frameworks that they're using. Go ahead and just answer it through the Q&A function in the Zoom platform. The Success Gap Toolkit has 6%. Active implementation is 2%. DataWise is 9% and FAR is 4%. Thank you. Next slide. So let's take 10 seconds. For those of you who selected other or none, I'm sorry, for those of you who selected none, jot down the names of 2 people who can help you select a planning framework. For everyone else, you'll want to use the process you know. So for this activity, you might jot down the names of 2 people that can help review some resources and or links in this PowerPoint and recommend helpful additions to your process. Remember, we're looking for you to leverage what you're currently doing and your strengths. We don't want you to recreate the wheel. Okay, next slide. Last year, the webinar addressed these early steps of improvement planning. It's important to conduct this in-depth analysis across groups of students throughout the district, especially those struggling academically or behaviorally. So the right policy, procedure, curriculum, or practice are identified for implementation or maybe improvement. If your LEA has not engaged in these steps, please review last year's webinar recording starting on slide 36, and the links are here on the slide. Next slide. Today, we're focusing on the processes of envisioning what you want student outcomes to look like in 3 to 5 years, drafting an action plan, implementing and monitoring progress, which includes making incremental changes to the plan based on what you're learning from your data and evidence, and if necessary, making bigger revisions to the action plan if you aren't seeing the results you anticipated. Another focus of today is to provide you facilitation resources for these processes and immediate use tools that can streamline and lighten your work. The planning frameworks linked in this presentation also provide tools and resources to support these steps. But as we previously emphasized, this work is not meant to require you to duplicate or slow down the work that you're currently doing. For example, if your LEA has already developed an action plan to address the rubric categories, don't go backwards. Move on in implementing and monitoring. Or if you're realizing your current action plan isn't well aligned to the determination priority categories, you can use these resources to iteratively improve alignment or skip to a redesign phase. And if you're looking for templates to use as is or modify for your district's needs, some are included here for your use as well. And make your life easier. Really utilize those 2 colleagues you listed in the last activity to review the framework to identify which will be particularly helpful to your specific process and work. Okay, let's jump in. This planning and improvement process helps build a bridge to the future, from the root causes of equity gaps to what we want our students' experiences, skills, and outcomes to look like in 3 years or longer. But if you don't know where you're going, you might not get there. That's where envisioning the future comes in. Next slide. Step 5 is envisioning the future. The vision, as defined by Massachusetts, records and describes aspirations for students, what you value and why, and what the future success will look like for all stakeholders. This step is important because the visioning process itself offers the opportunity to engage with a diverse range of stakeholders in the planning work and ensure voices from across the community are heard. Diverse perspectives in the planning process will strengthen the quality and the effectiveness of your plan, and inviting participation in the planning process builds ownership and advocacy in the community for the plan from both educators and families. An inclusive approach can also contribute to a positive district and school culture and help build shared understanding of the work and trust among stakeholders. We've included planning for success visioning tools. You can see at the bottom of your slide. It provides descriptions of facilitation processes and different approaches, and text for facilitator presentation slides. Also recommendations regarding how to organize groups and collect feedback, and the amount of time that's required to complete each of those activities. Next slide. Community feedback gathered through this process is essential data in developing the plan. There are a number of visioning protocols and processes that exist, or you can create your own if that fits better for your community. One visioning protocol that's commonly used is the Back to the Future protocol, which is linked in this presentation. Teams should also identify a process for using the protocol and for sessions with educators, for example, during a school faculty meeting, and with families, students, and community members. For example, using a CPAC meeting, or having it at a local community center or church, somewhere stakeholders already feel comfortable. Also consider how you might remove barriers for equitable participation and engagement. For example, what creative ways might you provide childcare or food so families with younger children and students themselves can participate? Also, do participants need interpreters? And is there a way to help with transportation? As a tip, it is helpful if leadership and planning teams are the first to participate in the visioning process. Of course, their participation is essential for the content, but they can also vet the protocol that you are planning to use and design, as well as facilitate sessions and provide scaffolds for stakeholder group participation later. Next slide. Once the planning team completes the visioning process, teams can analyze this feedback to find common themes as well as key outliers across stakeholder groups, and then explore connections between these themes and the results of the root cause analysis. This will help to further develop and refine strategic objectives and initiatives. Consider sharing these themes back to the community. That supports the community's sense of ownership for both the process and the resulting plan. This work will be the foundation of backward mapping from the vision to the details of the action plan. The process is critical to both the success and the credibility of the process because it's designed to honor and highlight the voices of the community. Next slide. The additional resources for this step include the Back to the Future protocol, community feedback, common themes worksheet, and identifying mission, vision, and core values. I'd like to point out the Back to the Future protocol. Themes identified within that can be used as starting places in identifying strategic objectives for the plan, the what and the why. And also it can serve as a useful starting point in identifying strategic initiatives themselves, or the how of the plan. Next slide. Who do you count on for great relationships with educators? Maybe someone with informal authority and is generally respected. How about families with students with disabilities? And what about students themselves? Who do they already trust? And what about trusted members of the community? Take 10 seconds to jot down the name of people who can help you design DEI approaches for engagement and feedback. And don't be afraid to think outside the box. A strategic team for your district could be an adjustment counselor, a general education and special education co-teaching team, and the local YMCA liaison. The next step is to develop an action plan that describes goals, tasks, and timelines for addressing root causes. Spend some time here because a well thought out action plan will help your team stay on track amidst competing priorities. It will help predict and neutralize potential barriers and help measure progress toward goals. If your district or school has a standard format for action planning, use that template for sure. Facilitation resources are linked at the bottom of this slide. PFS provides some resources that help a planning team go deep with this process, like connecting school and improvement plans to the district plan, to educator evaluation, and budget and allocating resources. While the Success Gap Toolkit provides tools that are simple, but provide less support for measuring progress and strategic alignment. Next slide. So the first step is developing SMART goals. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we know that you know what this is. Outlining action steps. After your team has identified and written the goal statement, you will determine the specific steps or tasks needed to accomplish the goal. This process may require you to divide your main goal into small goals or objectives. Doing so can help the team focus its work into an organized step-by-step action plan. Also consider your connections to other work. Your team may want to think about ways to align and braid your team's equity work with other action plans at the district or school level. And merging all of those action plans into one plan may make implementing and tracking more manageable. For example, suppose significant disproportionality is an area of identified need for your LEA. In that case, the action steps you craft to address this success gap may supplement or serve as an overall district equity plan. That district equity plan may include actions to support comprehensive support and improvement, schools identified under DESE, or it could also help with your SOA 3-year gap closing plans. Besides setting a time frame for accomplishing the long-term goal, your team should also include a timeline for monitoring the progress of each action step of the plan. By creating a well-thought-out timeline, the team can establish early indicators of success and milestones. These are essential to maintain progress toward the goal. The team should also include in the timeline a process for reporting progress. The communication feedback loop is critical to maintaining stakeholder engagement. So leaders need to consider when and how the teams and district leadership and other stakeholders will receive updates regarding progress and accomplishments. Next slide. Planning for evaluation. Evaluation should be planned as you are developing your action plan. Waiting until after you've implemented your initial action steps to think about the plan for progress monitoring and evaluation can result in your team not having the information you need in a timely manner. It can also result in the team not having baseline data in order to compare against for progress monitoring. At this point, your team will have invested a lot of time in developing this action plan. And it's equally important to track the plan's implementation. An evaluation plan can help you draw conclusions about your improvement work. Your team can monitor and evaluate implementation of the action plan by collecting process or implementation data and outcome data, which is the data about how students are doing. It's particularly helpful to go back to your vision. What look-fors did you describe for each stakeholder group? Additionally, consider what data you will collect to help you determine what changes you can measure before, during, and after implementation. Evidence shows that in Massachusetts, LEAs that identify benchmarks and actively monitor and manage progress toward those benchmarks as a norm are most successful. Benchmarks can include early indicators of change in attitudes, mindsets, and behaviors, as well as implementation plan activities and outcomes for students. Next slide. Here are some additional resources for this step. These resources tend to be plug and play immediate tools. Easy to use plan templates. It includes a graphic organizer to map goals with current initiatives, projects, and programs. The outcomes worksheet helps the team consider data sources you will use in setting targets for your SMART goals. And if the district or school does not currently collect data for an outcome you've identified, you can use this worksheet to begin planning for such data collection. Next slide. Also, the Success Gaps Toolkit includes additional resources to support evidence-based practices in assessment, the core instructional program, cultural responsiveness, database decision-making equity, and interventions and supports. What you see here is a screenshot of interventions and supports, along with the link to this resource. Next slide. Take 10 seconds to jot down the names of 3 other people who can help you finalize a cohesive set of resources and tools. For those of you who already have teams in place and have already developed your plan, write down 2 resources that are new to you that you're interested in knowing more about. Next slide. Okay. Step 7 is implementing the plan and monitoring progress. Monitoring plan implementation and progress on actions will help keep your team informed and accountable. As you consider modifying your action plan in response to your monitoring data, maximize the many perspectives that are available around you. You will want to bring all your teams together periodically, maybe a few times a year at a minimum, to discuss progress in general, updates on the work outlined in the action plan timeline, outcome data, challenges and solutions, and possible mid-course corrections. Again, you'll find facilitation resources at the bottom of the slide. The Planning for Success resources provide a deeper level of information and explanation, and the Success Gap Toolkits provides tools that are simple and easy to use. Next slide. As equity teams take on active implementation roles, it may be necessary to have a smaller group of implementers commit to meeting more frequently. This smaller work group should meet monthly, at least at the beginning. And the action plan can serve as a guide for building agendas for these meetings. The facilitator should track upcoming due dates on the action plan and identify which team members will need time on the agenda to provide updates to the group. These updates should include progress on the steps of the action items and implementation or outcome data that the team collected. Analyzing the data the team collects throughout the process will help your team to evaluate when progress is sufficient. Also, it'll help you to evaluate when you may need to revise your action steps to strengthen implementation or update your implementation strategies. Next slide. The additional resources for this step include 2 worksheets, one to support designing monitoring routines, including their regular practices and procedures, and the other to support gathering focused, up-to-date information. Next slide. Step 8 is revising the plan if necessary. Equity, inclusion, and opportunity for all children is important, but not easily achieved. The systemic factors contributing to success gaps for student groups with disabilities are often challenging to identify as well as address. Showing progress can help motivate your team members in difficult times, and that's why it's really important. Don't forget to celebrate the success with your teams. Completing a set of goals in your action plan and updating it annually can help you track progress and show improvement to all your stakeholders. And lastly, reassessing the status of your policies, procedures, and practices can help you think beyond the measurement of individual action steps to the evaluation of your efforts as a whole. Next slide. For our last activity, take 10 seconds to jot down any thoughts, questions, or epiphanies. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Abby Slayton and Jamie Camacho. Thank you.
Jamie, shall I begin?
Sounds good, Abby.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to take a few moments to introduce the Making Money Matter initiative that we refer to as M cubed, because it has exponential value in terms of the amount of funds being spent relative to the positive impact on student outcomes. If you are a district that has a needs intervention determination, you're required to participate in this initiative. It's been utilized by the department since 2017 to effectively improve student outcomes, providing guided opportunities for systemic improvements to close identified gaps following research-based processes that Holly has just finished describing to you. And doing so, offering also support from DESE staff for assistance to help your plan be successful. So participating districts must spend at least 2% of their IDEA funds on special education system improvements that are designed to address the specific gaps that were identified in the needs intervention determination email that you received and that we referenced earlier towards the beginning of the webinar. These systemic improvements must also be coherent with overall district improvement priorities. The set aside of 2% or more, you can spend more, should be used to support research-based activities such as data collection, root cause analysis, action planning, implementation of interventions, and emphasizing equity, gap closing, cultural sensitivity, and inclusive practices. This should all sound quite familiar to what you just heard Holly describe. It's all research-based towards improving our systems. So participating districts must submit their improvement plans for our approval as part of the IDEA Fund Code 240 RFP. We would encourage you to reach out early personally to us for assistance in planning that project prior to you submitting it in the IDEA application so that there aren't delays as we go through the approval process, because there are specific requirements around the activities that these funds support. You can contact me directly. You can see the link there. And I encourage you to review our webpage carefully that you also see a link to. This webpage is also could be very useful to other districts that are working on closing gaps. And the other links that you've seen in the webinar that Holly has referenced also will be very useful to districts participating in M cubed as you plan your projects for systemic improvement that are designed to close specific gaps and improve outcomes for your students. Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Abby. And Abby, I just want to clarify one thing because I know we've had a lot of information today and sometimes it's a little bit of information overload. So as far as participation in Making Money Matters, which is a requirement, districts that have been identified this year for an needs intervention, when would they have to make those changes? Well, reflect the information on their application, and when would that actually apply to them as far as the 2%?
So it follows, my understanding is it follows the RFP fiscal year. So the application would be come out this summer. Typically it's due sometime around October, and the MCube project and funds spent on it through that RFP would be for fiscal year 2024, the next school year.
Right, so districts that got notification this fall, they would be reserving that 2% or at least 2% on the application next year for FY24 funds. Is that correct?
Yes,
Thank you.
exactly. So those districts that already have understand that they have received the needs intervention determination can begin planning, looking at the web page, contacting me right now, and do it as part of spring planning activities together with the other district work for spring planning, so that by the time the RFP comes out this summer, the district will be ready to submit their plan. This is a great time for planning.
Thank you, Abby. And while we're talking about some fiscal considerations, and this is an area I've gotten a lot of feedback from schools and districts on, this is an area I think you want us to focus a little bit more on, and we're planning on doing that moving forward. But this is one thing I wanted to talk about is CEIS, which is Coordinated Early Intervening Services. And many of you may be familiar with what CEIS is. This is not a requirement. This is something, it's meant to be a preventative measure to address students who are not yet identified as needing special education. And what it allows you to do is you're able to set aside some money, your IDA funds, and there is much more flexibility in how you use these funds, which is not typically the case with IDA funds. So for example, you're focusing these funds on students that are not eligible for special education, have not been identified, putting some preventative measures in place, and you're able to use IDA funding for that. And this is completely optional, but I just wanted to mention this is a great strategy when you're doing your improvement planning and you're trying to figure out how do you address, you're doing this root cause analysis, you're finding different things that you might need to prioritize or strategies you want to implement, and your question is going to be, how do I fund that? This is one thing that you might want to think about and consider as far as a fiscal strategy. So, and again, we'll talk more about some fiscal things and hopefully the next webinar, but in other webinars that we have coming up that will also help you, I think, strategize how to address some of your fiscal considerations for improvement planning. Holly, did I miss anything that I should address on that, or Caitlin? Okay. I think we're ready to move on to the poll. So I think we're starting to get towards the end here. And so I realized this is our second year of doing this webinar. We didn't really have a webinar like this in place, and this year we wanted to make sure we kind of got to things that we didn't get to last year with the improvement planning piece. But moving forward, I want to hear from you on what kind of content. This was a broad overview of everything. I don't think we need to do a broad overview all the time, but there's, I'm sure, areas that you want us to consider, things, resources, strategies. And so this is what we're looking for is what areas would be helpful for us to provide you some additional support when you're looking at your improvement planning. And I see some percentages starting to come in, so I'll give you a minute. Holly, do we have an area that says other on this one?
No, we did not. There were limitations to the platform itself and the number of answers that we could put in there. However, we will be sending an evaluation to you shortly, and we will be asking that question in the evaluation. So please respond to that as well.
Thank you. And I know many of you have sent me emails or messages, and you have some ideas and things that might be helpful. That other piece, if there's things that we're not, this is a list of things that we're hearing from districts that might be things that you want to focus on. But if there's things that we're not addressing, it is helpful for us. So we're making sure that we're framing these webinars in a way that's going to help you in the work that you're doing. So should I end the poll now and share, Holly, April? Okay.
I ended the poll and shared the results.
All right, great. So it looks like things are kind of across the board. And so maybe it would be good for us to even have some separate breakout sessions that focus on certain topics. I also have a couple follow-ups from the last poll that we did. I'm interested in those of you that picked Planning for Success, how many actually have worked with Laurie, and we're working on some work in significant disproportionality. So we'll probably do some more follow-up questions to make sure that we're framing our next sessions in a way that are going to be supportive and give you the information and the support that you need. So thank you for that. People, are we wrapping up? Okay. I just want to mention a couple of things. I saw some questions that came in, and they're kind of still in the QA here that came up. So a couple of questions came up about how long do you actually have to do the improvement planning. Special education determinations, we call them LEA determinations, we're required to do them annually. So you're going to get an annual determination. We also realize, though, that improvement planning is not something that happens in less than a year, particularly if you're really doing a good, thorough root cause analysis, coming up with strategies. So there is really no time limit on the improvement planning. What we are going to be asking is there is a requirement for a end of the year report that really talk more about what did your team determine as far as priorities? Did you address, how did you address data? Do you have a data team in place? So we're asking more general questions about your improvement planning process and what your priorities were, and the composition of the people that really were at the table having these conversations and really looking at doing the improvement planning. We have, we can actually send that out so that you know what we're going to be expecting from you in June. But there is no requirement for the actual time for the improvement planning. The requirement is that you are engaging in it. And your support, whether it's public school monitoring that's working with you, or my office, special education planning and policy, or some of the other offices, even MQ, the work that they do with you. What we'll all be looking at is making sure that the improvement planning is actually happening, and we may have follow-up questions for you, but it will be individualized based on what your individual district needs are. So that's kind of the answer for that. Bonnie and Amy and April, anything else about the end of the year reporting that I should be letting everybody know?
Amy, it's fine. No, I think you covered it.
Okay, great. I also saw what are the expectations for NAs? Right now with NAs, the expectation is that you're doing some of the same things. You're engaging in improvement planning. We just are not requiring you to actually engage with us at DESE the same amount of engagement that we would ask for districts that are NI. So you do not have to do an end of the year report. But you certainly, we're hoping that you're going to be working on your improvement planning. You can reach out to us with your questions. I know you do. That requirement may change in the future, but for now, we are only focusing on the NI needs improvement districts that are actually required to submit an end of the year report to us. There's a lot of questions about links and things like that. The slides are definitely going to go out. Again, thank you to many of you have sent me emails with some suggestions, note pages moving forward, so you have slides ahead of time, you can write notes. Questions about getting where we like all the resources that we have, all the links and things like that, easier ways for you to have all this information in one place. But if you have other suggestions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer those questions or consider the things that you're looking at as far as things that might make this an easier process for you in the teams and your districts that are working on this. Can some of us, okay, so there's slides. Holly, I don't know that if we have the slides ready to drop in the chat or not. But what I will do, because there's some maybe people here that are attending that we're not on the individual invite emails, I will make sure that these are on our website, and I will also make sure, and my team remind me of this, that I send this out in the special ed updates that go out. Then I'll also send them out to all special ed directors. So this will go out in multiple ways to make sure that everybody's getting this. And needs assistance. I did see a clarifying question on making money matters.
Jamie, let
it
me
is-
jump in for just a second,
Sure.
going backwards. If you did not receive an invitation with the link to this webinar, please make sure that you're updating your district's information, contact information in profiles. Thank you.
And I think, Holly, it might be that there's teams of people. So somebody, maybe it just be part of a team. So we'll make sure that we post things in multiple ways. I also saw a question about the website. So the special ed website, if you go on to, I know a website is not always the easiest to find things on there, but if you go on the special ed website, and we should just send out some directions in general to make sure everybody knows what that link is. We update that website, my office does, and when we have anything new that we're posting, we put it in the, what's it called, the updates section. I think it says, actually says updates April. Is that what it's called? I think it's called the update section. It's right on the landing page. So as
Sorry,
we post things,
it is Jamie. I'm sorry, I couldn't find my mute button.
That's
It's
okay.
special education updates, and I will drop the link right into the chat.
Excellent. So there's a lot of information there. There's also a lot of information in our monthly updates that we send out. And you can sign up for that. That's a listserv. And that information is right on that landing page for special education too. It's on the right-hand column. And the last thing I want to clarify one more time, needs assistance. You are not required to participate in Making Money Matters. So it's only districts that are NI, so it needs intervention or next. So those that are identified this year will participate next year. So FY24 for those that are identified in FY23. I hope that answered the question. And the last one is a link for finding indicators 5 and 6. So again, and again, I'll send something out just where to find things on our website. We're kind of in the process of revising the overall website to make it a little bit easier for you to find information. But if you go on our special ed website, there is a link on the left-hand side, you'll see SPP APR. And when you see the SPP APR, the state performance plan and annual performance report, the indicators, this website, there's a page, all the different indicators, they're all listed out. There's lots of resources, and that's where you'll find the information for indicators 5 and 6. But again, hopefully my team's going to remind me of all this, and we're going to send this information out for you. I think we're just about done. I apologize for the technological issues at the beginning. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get on. But I think we have answered all the questions. Feel free to reach out to us. There's a couple other things I'll address through our regular emails that we send out. But I think that's it. Anything else that I'm missing? Holly, April, Lonnie, Amy?
Nope. I think we're
Thank
good.
you to all the DESE staff that's here. Thank you for attending. And we really look forward to hearing more feedback from you. And you'll be getting more information from us on the next steps for future webinars. Have a good day, everybody.